Good evening and welcome to this is why I have the January 8th, thank you, 2020 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Haywood, would you please call roll?
Chairperson Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Here.
Cahill. Downs. Kusler. Sullivan.
Here.
Watson.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
And Wolf.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first thing on our agenda is the election of officers for 2020. I would open the floor for nominations for chair. Vice Chair Boyle, or current Vice Chair Boyle.
I nominate Dan Bowman for chair.
By means of second, I will accept that nomination.
Second.
Thank you. There's a second from, nomination by Vice Chair Boyle, second by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion on that motion, or on that nomination? Hearing none. Are there any other nominations for our chair? Seeing none, then we'll close the nominations for chair and take a vote. All those in favor of Mr. Bowman serving as chair for 2020, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, that motion carries. And this time I will open up nominations for vice chair. Vice Chair, Commissioner Williams.
I nominate Commissioner Boyle.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Williams and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Any discussion on that motion? Are there any other nominations for vice chair from the floor? I'm hearing none. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of electing Commissioner Boyle for vice chair, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, motion carries. Let's tell you what, it's just not having that printed copy in front of me has thrown me off. Item 1C on our agenda is approval of the agenda. I would move approval of the agenda as presented to us.
So moved.
Support.
That's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, that motion carries as well. And finally, item 1D, the approval of the minutes of the December 11th, 2019 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Wolf.
Second.
And seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, that motion carries as well. That brings us on to item 2, committee reports. The Form-Based Code Committee will report that the committee met on December 13th, and I thought that was a productive meeting. We started to talk. We talked specifically, or at great length, about matters regarding bonus heights and those. The incentives that would trigger those. Ultimately, we arrived at some thoughts and then ultimately decided that that's something that would be best decided by the entire commission. So I think that's something that we'll see at our next work session. We are trying to establish a new date for the next meeting, and that's just currently in process. So we'll keep you posted on that. Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Wolf, anything you wanted to add regarding that? Any questions for the committee? All right, and you all got a notice. I didn't see that everybody had responded, but we all got noticed on potential work sessions leading into as far as April. So please, if you haven't responded, please do so to let Ms. Ordealis know what dates are available so we can move that forward. That brings us on to item 3, staff reports. Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, just to give you an update on council activity from December 17th. They scheduled the consideration of the Oakwood boundary study for January 21st. It'll also be discussed at next week's discussion-only meeting on the 14th. They scheduled a public hearing for the Hub 2 development for January 21st, and scheduled a public hearing for the Rockwood development on Abbott Road for January 21st. They approved the Park District Building C modification and approved the Locos Torteria special use permit for 115 Albert. They denied a rezoning request for the Park Lake and Hazlitt Road property and approved a site plan and special use permit amendment for 1525 Water Tower Place. We also received written communication from the People's Church discussing the potential, excuse me, MSU, FCU, the Michigan State Federal Credit Union development in Albert, but we're concerned about the impact on parking. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, that'll move us on to item 4, Commissioner announcements. Seeing that no one has announcements, we'll move us on to item 5A, communications from citizens. This is the time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and make comments on any items that are or are not on our agenda. We would typically ask that if you're going to make comments on an item that is covered under public hearings, that you wait until that item comes before us on the agenda. But if you're here to make comments on any old business or on items that are not currently noted on our agenda, I would invite you to come forward now. I see I do have a card for the 920 Narcissus Drive application, and so I see who the person that would like to speak about that is the applicant, and so we'll invite you to come up at that time. Yes, thank you. Anybody else that would like to make comments? All right, then, seeing that no one's coming forward, we'll just reiterate what Mr. Haywood had said about, we had all received a copy of a letter from the People's Church regarding the development that's going on near Valley Court Park. That'll move us on to our public hearings and item 6A. This is our first public hearing. A public hearing will be held to consider a site plan application from WREL LLC for the properties at 3118 and 3126 West Road to allow for the construction of a one-story, 20,382 square foot office building. Ms. Schmidt.
This application is proposed on property that is divided between B5 and RA zoning property. It's proposed to be rezoned to all B5. That application is on your agenda this evening. Generally, the property is surrounded by predominantly B4 and B5 zone properties. The development proposes a one-story, 20,382 square foot, one-story office building. It was previously approved for 58 parking spaces at the rear of the property that were to be shared with the property to the south of this building at 3100 West Road. 58 of those parking spaces, 55 will remain, 3 will be removed to allow for circulation in the new proposal. There will be an additional 54 spaces added to the development. The proposal has proposed 7 bicycle parking spaces at the northwest side of the building. There's no electrical vehicle station proposed at this time. That will need to be added prior to building permit being site plan approval for building permit. The applicant does have access to water and sanitary sewer off West Road. They are proposing to use the same dumpster enclosure for both 3100 and this development. They currently do not have a sidewalk proposed from the main sidewalk to the office building. That will need to be added, as well as a sidewalk between the two properties for the shared parking. They do not have to have a traffic study at this time, and fire and police do not have any concerns. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Ms. Schmidt? Just, is the notion of the shared dumpster, does that meet with our site plan?
We require that they have provisions for dumpster enclosure. We don't have anything that specifically says it has to be on their property.
Okay. And the dumpster that I saw on the property to the south is currently not enclosed?
Correct. They would have to enclose that.
Okay. Sorry, any other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Wolf?
I have a couple of questions about the public sidewalk width. As mentioned in the staff report, the site plan shows that 5-foot wide sidewalks would be built along Abbey Road and along West Road. And first of all, I noticed that, I got the wrong one open. open here. In attachment A, which is the staff report on the 2015 site plan application where they first put in the parking lot.
Correct.
There's a condition of approval that requires an 8-foot wide sidewalk along all major road right-of-way. And I went out and looked at the site, and there is a sidewalk along Abbey Road, but it's only 5 feet wide.
Right.
Did that get changed? That condition get changed? Or?
No, Abbey would not be considered a major road.
Okay. So the condition was really not appropriate for the site plan?
Correct.
Okay. Is West Road a major road?
West Road is a major road for the purpose of special use permits. But the sidewalks, it's my understanding that the sidewalks are under the Act 51 road, major road map, which is a little bit different than the map that we use for special use permits that is in our master plan, slightly different.
Was it earlier in 2019, I think it was, we approved the most recent building in the Maynard
Right.
office development. They put in a new driveway out to West Road, and we required them to put a roadside sidewalk where that driveway comes out, and that is 8 feet wide on West Road.
I will check, but I believe that was 5 feet.
I went and looked at it. and
It's 8?
It is 8.
Okay, we'll
on
look
the
into
site.
that.
Now, maybe that's more than we required them to do,
Right.
but,
Well, I'll check with the engineer and see what their call is on that, because they didn't
Okay.
call it out in their letter, and that's why I was sure that that was the case.
in addition, the sidewalk on West Road that's south of this property, in other words, it's in front of the rest of WREL's property, is only 5 feet wide. So
Correct.
that would match up with what they're planning on their site plan, but it seems like we've got some discrepancies here to work out.
Right. We'll bring that to the attention of the engineers and see what their call is on that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Yeah, Commissioner Williams.
Well, I see in the staff report, and you mentioned that the existing 58 parking spaces
Correct.
will be reduced to 55, and there's an intention to share that parking with the new building and 3100 West Road.
Correct.
Could you just speak to the timing for shared parking arrangements and how that works? When does that get committed to writing? When does that arrangement get struck? Is that part of what we'll see next time when we see this?
They are already, that parking is already being used by 3100. They will have a cross-access easement between the two properties, and that will be their shared parking allowance, and that will be part of their agreement.
So they already have a shared parking
Right.
agreement? So even though it's being reduced slightly, there isn't any requirement that that be readdressed?
No, because they actually have on their own properties
Enough.
sufficient property
Okay.
or sufficient parking. This is above and beyond.
Got it.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, sort of along the same lines, there's a statement in the staff report, which I probably can't find right at the moment, but it's about the, oh, I know, it's in the table at the end. About the parking setback on the south side of this property. The site plan shows they have 0 setback there.
Correct.
And it says no setback is required for shared parking. So the way I understand it, if this were a completely new development under a different owner, and it were built here as a completely distinct, separate, then that parking setback would have to be met, right?
Not if they were doing shared parking.
But that's what I'm saying, if they were
Right.
completely separate.
Right, correct.
So they're given the ability to build right up next to the other lot line because of the shared parking.
Correct.
What's the implication of that if they, at some time in the future, decided to sell off this part of the property while keeping the southern part? Does that then become a non-conforming property? Or?
No, because it still remains a shared situation, a shared agreement between the two properties.
They would be required to maintain
have an
the
easement.
legal access
Right.
easements and so forth for
Correct.
shared parking. All right. Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Schmidt? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is the applicant here? Is there anything you'd like to come forward, if there's anything you'd like to add, or if you'd be willing to take additional questions from the commission? You're nothing to add to what's been presented so far? That's
I'm
fine.
practically deaf, so.
Oh, well, then I'll lean in.
I'm sorry,
I guess.
but
That's fine.
it is what it is.
Yeah, well, there you go. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the
No,
presentation?
I did want to comment on yours. When we developed 3100, at that time,
Could you just state your name for?
Phil Crockett,
Thank
I'm
you.
the owner of 3100. I'm also the owner of the new property
Sure.
that is going to be developed. It's our intent to have that really basically used as one shared site. And we currently are doing that right now. And there is a road, a sidewalk that connects the two. It's on the drawings, but it's not clear enough. So I'm going to take care of that with Darcy, so there's no question about that. But when we developed 3100, the 5-foot sidewalk was approved at that time adjacent to West Road. And then the property next to that, which is a hotel or motel or something, that's a 5-foot also. And then the Independent Bank, which is further to the south, that's also 5-foot. So it's that whole strip right there, it would be a continuation of that. Other than that, where the shared property is, we needed to share the property because there wasn't initially, back in 15, adequate parking if the whole site was being utilized properly. To this date, we have not used all of those extra spaces that we had approved because we have still some undeveloped or unrented spaces. But if our entire 3100 was even to 90-something%, we would need to use that shared parking. So this parking lot here still will be used for both 3100 and the new building. So that's basically where we're at. We're planning on starting the construction of the site work in the spring. Assuming that it gets approved. I don't want to be presumptuous.
Not at all. Other questions, any other questions for Mr. Crockett? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah. First, a comment. I just want to confirm that you're not using that lot. I went out to look at the site yesterday in the afternoon, in the middle of the business day. And I was surprised that shared lot was completely empty except for one vehicle.
Yes.
So that surprised me. But
When I was meeting with the drain commissioner, they asked the same question. And again, when you look at the requirements that we have with our leaseholders currently at 3100, and then you add in the empty, the spaces that have not been leased and the minimum requirement for that, that requires that we did have those several, something like 50, wasn't it, right? Something like 50 parking places. We are contractually required to do that to meet both code and our commitments to the different tenants. One reason why on certain times that's not used a lot is we have one tenant that brings in 4 or 5 times a year, somewhere between 40 and 60 people, and they have to park. And we don't want them to park on the street or anywhere else. They're not there most of the time, but they do have their meetings, and they're under obligation with us. That's one of the requirements that we have with them to provide this parking for them. So that was, so we certainly didn't not want to buy that property or to build that parking lot. It cost us about $600,000 to do that. However, contractually, we had contracts with our various tenants, and the empty spaces were required to comply with those agreements. And that's why we had the approval in 2015. Now, actually, even if we didn't need that, there's a lot of tenants, as you know now, new buildings are requiring more and more parking. They just are. At some point, the city may want to actually visit that, because the one divided by 300, and then you have a 125% increase. That's not meeting the current needs of many of these new buildings now. And so I assure you that if we build that building, that parking lot will be used to its capacity. It will be.
All right, that leads directly into my next question, which isn't really about your property, but about the surrounding conditions. I just wanted your perspective on this. When I was out there yesterday, I was surprised, almost shocked, to see on Abbey Road, east of your property, between your property and Coolidge, there was at least a dozen, maybe 15 cars parked on Abbey Road.
Yes.
Is that common, and do you know where that
that's been common for the last over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. We didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
We didn't want to use that space, but the other buildings do not have adequate parking. When you go and look at their buildings, I hope I'm not saying something that will get me in trouble, but they don't have adequate parking, so they spill over into the street.
Right. I mean, it was obvious driving through there.
Yeah, and they commonly use, I would say, almost a block or so of parking there. But I think it's legal. I think they have a sign on there that says parking up to here on the street. So,
all right.
I don't think they're doing anything illegal.
Yeah.
Other questions for Mr. Crockett? I just have one comment that we're missing a couple of elevations. I suspect we'll see those at the next, the building elevations. A couple building elevations are missing.
Yeah.
And
so whatever Darcy needs to have, she will get.
I'm sure. We don't typically, we wouldn't need that for the old business that we're going to be looking at, hopefully within an hour or so. But for this particular application, we'd want to see that what's being proposed is compatible with the area and so on. So,
no, I did have on my site plan the front elevation.
Yep.
But if you want additional ones, we can get that.
Are you going to have 4 elevations in your building?
Yeah, we can do that.
Terrific. Then
very easily.
If we could see them all, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
They're going to be, say in a short way, they're going to be almost identical.
I presumed so. Yeah, that's
Yes.
fine. Other questions for Mr. Crockett? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
This time I'd like to open up the public hearing for this application. If anybody's here that wishes to speak about the properties at 3118 and 3126 West Road, I'll invite you to come forward now. I'm seeing nobody, so we'll close the public hearing and return it to the commission. Any direction for, any questions, additional questions for the applicant, or questions or directives for staff? All right, I think you've got some good ideas, and we'll see this presumably in a couple weeks. That'll move us on to item 6B, our second public hearing of the evening. This is a public hearing will be held to consider an application from the City of East Lansing to combine city parking lot number 4 on Abbott Road, parcel number 33-20-01-13-229-011, with vacant land, which fortunately doesn't have a serial number associated with it, but it's referred to as the Albert Avenue right-of-way. Mr. Haywood.
Thank you. So this is a proposed lot combination of the parking lot number 4 on Abbott Road and land kind of recently created from the realignment of Albert Avenue as part of the Park District development. As they redeveloped their property, that Albert Road shifted south and created, kind of freed up some city-owned land. So with that, in conjunction with the interest from Michigan State Federal Credit Union to develop in that location, we are proposing to assemble those two pieces of property to kind of pave the way either for that development or future development. The proposed development at this point, very generally, is for credit union branch, an intern center, event space, and potentially future office space in a 5 to 8 story building, topping out at 112 feet. Total site size with the two parcels combined is 0.3 acres. Abbott Road frontage would be just over 90 feet, and the Albert Road frontage at 130, just over 130 feet. The ballot measure to sell the property will appear on the election ballot on March 10th. With that, the design requirements for creating lots or lot splits, a minimum width to depth ratio of 2.5 to 1. This is proposed at 1.8. The depth is 164 feet, where the minimum depth for lots is 120 feet. With regard to master plan compliance, there are, the objective 2-1 is to increase attraction and diversity of downtown. So assembling this land and then the ultimate rezoning that we'll talk about offers more office users, redevelopment of underutilized properties, and considering even city-owned properties for redevelopment. It's categorized in M4, and in the intent of the M4 category, which is our most intensive mixed-use district, is to provide a broad range of land uses to draw employers, significant employers to the downtown area. Allows for buildings up to 10 stories and 140 feet, and is most analogous to our B3 zoning district. So since we processed this application and began looking at it in more detail, we discovered, we had originally thought that this was going to require council waiver for width to depth ratios, and after looking more closely at the surveys, it appears that that's not necessary. So having said that, rather than going through the whole process, staff is proposing that the Planning Commission, if you want, you can hold a public hearing as a courtesy to the public since it was announced, but if not, really no action is required, and we would not continue to process the application through the intended process, but cut it short and do it administratively. Sure. So with that, I would take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Haywood, who's also the applicant effectively? Okay, then I would, oh, sorry.
Well, so does that mean we treat this as a withdrawn application, or do we?
I suppose that would probably procedurally
To have
be,
some resolution for the agenda item? Or
it's probably fair point. I hadn't thought of that, but that would probably be appropriate. Consider that our intent.
Unless you would prefer to have a public hearing.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're
You could
saying
have
that
the
there's no
public
need for
hearing.
the planning commission to vote on.
Ultimately, there's no need to proceed with it. It qualifies as an administrative approval, which we intend to do.
Okay, Vice Chair Bo?
Well, I would just say, since it was noticed as a public hearing, and since it's going to be done administratively, it would be worthwhile to see if there's any public comment, which then could be considered
fair enough.
in making the administrative decision.
Sure. Commissioner Sullivan, did I see a hand?
Yeah. Just point of clarification. I see it listed as 112 feet. Is that what they're proposing, or is that the maximum allowable?
That would be the maximum allowed
Got it.
under the ballot language.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, seeing none, I'll invite any members of the public who have comments to make on this, the lot combination at city parking lot number 4 and the vacant land at around Albert Avenue to come forward now. I'm seeing no one come forward, so we'll close the public hearing. You can take those comments with you to as you administratively move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. That'll move us on to item 6C. A public hearing will be held to consider ordinance 1480 on an application to rezone Albert Avenue right-of-way, an area currently not zoned, and city parking lot number 4, which is parcel number 33-20-01-13-225-011, which is zoned C, Community Facilities, to B3, City Center Commercial District. I see, oh, okay, I thought that was Ms. Schmidt coming up to the podium. Mr. Haywood, your name is on the staff report.
Yep, so this public hearing we do have to move forward with, and I guess in the interest of brevity, I covered almost all of the issues related to the proposed and potential development for the property, compliance with the master plan, design requirements, the intent of the future land use category and such. And with that, the only other addition that I'll add is that again, just to reemphasize that the B3 district is our most intensive mixed-use commercial district, allowing buildings potentially up to 140 feet, with a special use permit, of course. And with that, the comments back from agencies or internal agencies, engineering, fire, and police, had no concerns with the proposed rezoning. So with that, I would take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Haywood? All right. Seeing that no one's got any questions, I will, and you are effectively the applicant again, I'll open the public hearing on this particular matter. This is regarding the intention of the application to rezone the Albert Avenue right-of-way and city parking lot 4. Any members of the public who have comments to make on this application, I'd invite you to come forward now. Seeing no one come forward, we'll close the public hearing and return this to the commission. We take this forward. Okay, and presumably we'll see this. Are there any other questions for Mr. Haywood? Yeah. All right, we'll see this in 2 weeks then. That'll move us on to item 6D. This is a public hearing will be held to consider a lot split application from Kathleen S. Edsel for the property at 920 Narcissus Drive to split the lot into 2 lots. See, Mr. Parcells' name is on the staff report. Is it not? Mr. Haywood, please.
Thank you. So as this is a lot, or a proposal to split the existing lot into 2 parcels. The current zoning of the property is R2, medium density, single family residential. It is also in a rental overlay district, the R03 district, which restricts rentals to owner occupied units where the owner can rent rooms to a single person. Current lot size of the parcel is 73 feet wide by 132 feet deep, just over 9,000 square feet. Currently developed with a single-family home and garage. The 2 new lots are proposed to be roughly the same dimensions, 66 feet by 73, with the existing house and garage on the very corner of the property and the new vacant lot just west of that. The standards for lot splits and new lots for the district, as I mentioned before, the minimum lot width for a parcel is 120 feet, and lot area is 5,000 square feet. The 2 new lots created would be just under 5,000 square feet at 4,818 each. And neither of the 2 lots would be deep enough to meet the minimum lot depth. So variances would be required for both of the lot areas and the lot depth. Lot coverage, minimum required, or excuse me, the maximum building coverage is 25% for the R2 district. The newly created lot with the house and garage would be just over 27%, which would require a variance as well. Staff has provided context in terms of typical lot size of the area. Properties in the vicinity, we provided information about their lot sizes and lot widths. Generally, lots don't meet the depth, but are deeper than the proposed lot. But generally, the lot areas do meet the minimum requirement. So with that, I would take any questions or comments.
Questions for Mr. Haywood? Vice Chair Both?
I was wondering, how does the proposed lot sizes with this split compare to the lot sizes in, like, the eastern part of Bailey, Spartan, and Gunson, which has smaller lots, and also Avondale, which has smaller lots?
I would have to do some
Yeah,
research on that.
I
That's
didn't
okay.
expect you to know that off the top of your head.
Thank you. But we can compare that when we bring it back.
I don't know. I don't know if they're site condos or not.
Other questions for Mr. Haywood? Commissioner Wolf?
For the application of our zoning requirements, our dimensional requirements and so forth, we define the front of a corner lot as being the smaller dimension of the lot. So currently, the front of this lot is on Narcissus. With the split, the lot, well, both lots would now have their fronts on Daisy. Correct?
Correct.
Because they're both 66 feet. I think it would be good to add that to the staff report, because it's actually critical. The staff report says that the lot with the house on it would meet the setback requirements. And in fact, if you didn't turn those around, it doesn't appear it would meet the rear setback anymore. The rear setback is required to be 20 feet, and when you cut that lot off, there doesn't appear to be 20 feet left on what is currently the rear.
Right.
So I think it's the fact that the front will move is what allows it to now meet those requirements.
Check on that. I knew we were going to have to adjust the staff report to reflect the orientation concern. I saw that.
Yeah.
But we'll double check the setback requirements for those.
And then just I know this doesn't happen terribly often, so maybe there is no procedure, but would it not be the case, or would it be the case, that given that the house is already placed and its front already faces Narcissus and already has an address on Narcissus, would it not maintain that as its front? Or would it or would it not?
It would continue to maintain that address. The orientation based on the narrowest side is only for the purpose of evaluating lot width, setbacks, and that kind of thing, not necessarily the address.
Right. Okay. Other questions for Mr. Haywood? Okay. The applicant has actually submitted a card, and I'd invite you to come forward now, Dr. Edsel.
Hi, Kath Edsel, 1026 Daisy Lane, East Lansing. I've lived at the Daisy Lane address, which we built new 23 years ago. Love the neighborhood, absolutely love the neighborhood. Just wanted to share a little bit of background on what I'm trying to do, because I'm basically here asking for your help on figuring this out. I purchased the house, the 920 Narcissus, which abuts the 1026, which we live in. We are one of those lots where our house is here and our main yard goes here. The Narcissus one, the house is here with the yard behind it going here and meeting at this area. I purchased this house primarily for my now 27-year-old son, who is autistic and is on disability. And my plan is to have him, always to not end up homeless in the long run. So he lives independently. He, cooks for himself. He does all of that. I want to put the house in a trust, but he does not do yard care very well. And so that is a big backyard there that I want to remove from the house, so that he doesn't end up getting ticketed once I'm no longer able to care for the yard. So that's the goal. That's the long-term goal, is to put as little property as possible into a trust for him for long-term planning. So I came to the city and asked about a lot split, and thinking that was the way to go. What I have discovered in this process, all of the building and lot requirements. One of the things, the list that I have for R2, minimum lot width is 60 feet, not 112. I think you said 112, and I don't know if that was a mistake, but your staff report says 60 feet as well.
Yeah, there's sort of depth and width.
Right, and then, so the depth then would be 73 feet on the new lot, and the depth would be the 66 feet on the old lot. And I don't have a depth measurement on the paper that I got at the city. What I've discovered when I look at the old plats is at some point in time, the 920 address ceded 9 feet to the two northern properties so they could split and make a minimum enough property at, let me just, I think it's on page 3 of the report. Nope, I'm sorry. It's this one here. So there's 1013 lilac and 1021 lilac. That's backyard line, doesn't line up with everybody else because they got 9 feet from the 920 property, which I didn't realize even though I look out my back door and I can see that 9 feet that's over there. Just didn't occur to me. And then, so the only other comments that I had, so another suggestion that has been made is then to cede some of 1026, my other property, to make those lots fit within the 5,000 square feet. If we need to do that, that's something I'm willing to look at as well. I did look at the staff report had included a couple of other homes on the intersection there. But if you look, shoot, let me find my page. Just across, all right, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
It's this piece here, the City of Lansing map. So this is my property, 1026 and 920. This is the two properties that were split behind it. There's a lot of property splits here, down here at the end. There's a little teeny one on the corner. If you go right across the street, there's 963 lilac, which fits within the square footage and the width and the depth of 968. But at some point, this little property I labeled A, right on where Daisy turns, that property is on a piece of property that's only 1,300 square feet. And B, right across from it's on something that's 4,400 square feet, property B. I didn't have a chance to stop and get the addresses on those two. But there's a table in the staff report that includes a number of houses that meet the square foot requirement, but those ones are a block away and they don't meet the square foot requirement. So those are the primary comments that I had regarding, and there's one other, so the depth on the two properties, 1021 and 1013, are misstated on the page 3 of the staff report. 1013 lilac and 1021 lilac should be 91.5 feet. The square footage is correct, but that's because that 9 feet that was deeded or ceded or somehow from the original plat line given to those two properties to the north, so that it looks like what they did was they wanted a small property at 921, like the minimum square footage, and then 913 is the 72 by 91 square feet, giving you the 6,621 square feet. Does that make sense? I was just correcting numbers because when I looked at it, it didn't make sense because I knew we'd given up 9 feet,
right,
and everybody else had a 82-foot depth.
Go ahead, yeah.
So on the, you mean on the table of
Yeah,
properties
the
that we
table on
listed?
page 3. The properties at 1013 and 1021, their depth should be 91.5 feet. The math is correct. The square foot size is correct. I don't know if it was just a transposition error when somebody was putting it into the table. Because everything else in that neighborhood is 82.5 feet.
Okay.
But that's where I lost my 9 feet long
You said
before.
the lot widths are incorrect? Depths.
What I said originally was that you had, yeah, those two, well, actually, 1013, the driveway to 1013 Lilac is on Narcissus, but I guess the front door is on Lilac. So if you consider that the depth from Lilac, it's 91 feet. If you consider it from Narcissus, it's 72 feet.
And so where did you get your numbers from?
Well, I took the platted lots, and I looked, which are really hard to read.
Okay.
And I just looked at that they had all the depths as 82.5 feet, but somewhere 9 feet of the southern property was given up to the northern property, so I just added 9 feet to it. And then when you look at all of these, that lot line comes down. These ones are all listed as 82.5, and then you can see the lot line comes down onto the 920, which is that 9 feet. And it even says it in the lot description. Oh, it's the report I had from my,
So you're
it
saying
says
that-
less 9 feet.
So you're saying that both parcels are 9 feet longer?
The two on Lilac are 9 feet longer, and so that's why mine's only 72 instead of 82, or
We'll
73
check
instead
that.
of 82. It's mostly a detail and sort of explains why I can't split my lot and everybody else can and still have 5,000 feet. Because at some point that 9 feet was given up to the northern properties, that leaves my piece of property a little short of being able to go 5 and 5. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then on the setback, excuse me, the garage I know, which is further back than the house, is 6 feet from the property line. Accessory buildings have to be 3 feet in that neighborhood. I never did measure where the house ends, where the new property line would be, so I can't answer that. And it's not on the, on the survey drawing, but with the new lot. So I guess my goal is to try to figure out the best way to do this. You know, worst case scenario, if the house burned down, are they gonna be able to build on that lot? Am I gonna be able to use the middle lot to build on? And if that means ceding 3-4 feet of my Daisy Lane property to make all of those lots workable, then that works for me too. My hope with the vacant lot is one of many options to either build on for one of my many other children, or potentially for myself and move out of the big house and my wife and I move into the smaller house and sell the big house at some point down the line, or potentially build and sell, or sell the lot. I mean, sort of in that order is my thoughts about that other lot. But the primary goal is to give my oldest son the least amount of room possible to screw up. I mean, excuse me. I didn't mean it that way.
To maintain.
Okay.
All right? Any
Question
other-
for, would you prefer Dr. Edsel or Ms. Edsel?
Technically,
Let's say
doctor.
doctor. Let's
Kath
do it right.
works, but doctor's
Exactly. I
probably
mean, Jennifer would call you Kath, but
Yeah,
let's do it
which
right.
is okay to him.
Dr. Edsel, any questions for Dr. Edsel?
I do. You definitely want the lot between the Narcissus property and your home to be buildable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because then somebody still has to take care of it if it's not. Buildable with somebody living in it, ideally, and then they take care of it.
Because one thing you can do is whatever the minimum you can get away with the Narcissus property, and just put the
Tack
rest
it onto
on your
mine.
property.
And I've thought about that too. I mean, that would be number 5 on my list of options. So,
Then you have to maintain it, but
right. So that's why I had all those children, right?
Other questions?
Thank you all
It sounds,
very
just
much.
a sec.
Oh,
It sounds like you were coming here at least partially looking for some advice. I don't know
Yeah.
that, I think ultimately, I don't know that you're going to get a solution, certainly not tonight, and maybe not even after a little bit of discussion, but, yeah, I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
what we can do is maybe get in touch with you right away after this meeting, and now that, I guess I didn't understand your goals.
Okay.
Maybe you explain that to Jake or not, I don't know.
A little bit,
but-
probably not quite as in-depth.
Right, so I think what we need to do is maybe sit down and go back to the drawing board with all these properties in mind and see if we can't figure out how we can meet that goal for
Okay.
you and get as close as we can to the minimum standards with the fewest variances as possible and that kind of thing. So maybe we can hit the drawing board with you and
That'd be awesome.
That's essentially what I was
Yep.
going to suggest.
Yep.
That largely, but what, in terms of, ultimately, you'd have to get a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and what you're suggesting here is what they would refer to as a self-imposed hardship, which doesn't fly particularly well,
Okay.
right? So that, if there's something that's sort of been imposed upon you, and perhaps that sort of that encroachment of the 9 feet might, right, that's one of the
Oh,
things you could
gotcha.
check off, because now you've got 5,000 square feet. You still don't have the proper depth, perhaps, but that's one more thing that you can say, got that.
Okay.
Is
The
that-
the
is that
minimum
correct?
depth of 120 feet
Right.
is a requirement that's in Chapter 40, which is our land divisions.
Okay.
I'm not promising you something that council can do, but you wouldn't have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. That'd be something council could do. So
I don't, but
it's
there's,
a little bit less of a hurdle. It still could be a hurdle, but
Okay.
there are some options that we can talk about.
okay. I just, 120, you said, 120? I mean,
120.
there's like
minimum-
no
minimum
houses
depth.
on
Yeah.
that, on my side of the street that are 120. They're all 82 and a half.
That's right.
Which is interesting.
And
Okay.
this has come up when we've done some work in Bailey within the last couple of years, where I suspect, I don't absolutely know, but that the houses, the lots were platted and then the zoning was overlaid on top of that, and they tried to get, the best guess as to what would work best. And so clearly, when you've done that, if you start out with relatively, I mean, you've got, if when this was platted, if you only had, say, 170 feet from Daisy to, is it Lilac?
Lilac.
Right? You can't get can't get two lots in that space, and so it was platted perhaps, and then the zoning was perhaps overlaid on top of that, essentially creating a bunch of non-conforming dimensional lots. And we've lived with it, and, but now we're sort of facing, when people want to make modifications, how do we handle that? And so there's mechanisms by which that can be handled.
Okay.
It sounds to me like your best initial action is probably to re-meet with staff and talk about what some of those options are.
Okay. Sounds good.
I mean, ultimately, I think typically this commission and council generally, this is me speaking for one of, sort of several people, is to increase density wherever possible. Now, there's obviously a point at which density gets too high, but I don't know that you're proposing that. Ultimately, I guess we'll see what.
Not going to put an apartment building
Yeah,
there.
exactly. Ultimately, we're going to see where it leads to, correct?
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant or for Mr. Haywood? All right. I do have to open up the public hearing for this so that we can, so if you'd stick close, maybe someone will have questions for you. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Thanks.
So at this point, I'd like to open up the public hearing for this property. Anybody, any members of the public who have comments to make or questions to raise about the property application for 920 Narcissus Drive, I'll invite you to come forward now. And seeing nobody, we'll close the public hearing and return this back to the commission. Any questions for the applicant, or directives or directions, or questions for staff? All right, then we will presumably see this at a later date, and that will move us on to our old business, starting with item 7A, ordinance 1478. This is an ordinance to amend the zoning use district map of Chapter 50 zoning of the Code of the City of East Lansing to rezone the property at 3118 West Road from RA Residential Agricultural District to B5 Community Retail Sales Business District. Mr. Haywood.
Thank you. So this coincides with the site plan that we reviewed earlier in the meeting, so part of the development project is still zoned RA in order to accomplish their office development. That remaining portion would need to be rezoned. So the property to the north, which is the rest of the development site, is zoned B5. Farther to the south and east is also B5. The remaining properties to the north and west are zoned B4. Again, this is the corner of Abbey and West Road. B5 generally is our community retail sales business district. It generally allows retail, office, clinical uses, labs, general commercial, shopping centers, assembly hotels, motels, and higher education. With a special use, you can go toward drive-in facilities, recreation, alcohol sales, and medical marijuana safety compliance, and transporter facilities. The district allows building heights up to 4 feet, or 4 stories, 64 feet, or 6 stories and 84 feet with a special use permit on 4 acres or larger. With regard to the master plan, it is categorized in the C2 commercial district, which is analogous to the B5 zoning district, which requires a minimum of 4 stories and a maximum of 6. With that, I would take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Haywood? I've certainly seen this before. In fact, even earlier tonight, Commissioner Wolf.
I will move that we recommend approval of ordinance 1478, a request from Philip Crockett for WREL LLC to rezone the property at 3118 West Road from RA Residential Agricultural to B5 Community Retail Sales Business District.
Second.
There's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Watson. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, I'll just say this is obviously following up on what was started 4 years ago with the existing parking lot, and we kind of knew all along that this would be the last RA property. This will rezone it to B5, consistent with all the surrounding properties. And of course, it's consistent with the master plan.
Any other discussion? All right, then we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries. It moves us on to item 7B. This is ordinance 1479, an ordinance to amend the zoning use district map of Chapter 50, zoning of the Code of the City of East Lansing to rezone the property at 341 and 345 Evergreen Avenue from conditional B3 City Center Business to conditional B3 City Center Business to allow for revisions to the associated site plan and special use permit. Mr. Haywood.
The most awkward title ever. So this ordinance and request, again, coincides with another development, the Park District development. This is relative to the Building C conditional rezoning that was approved in, I believe it was 2018. And since the modification to Building C, which would add a fifth floor, sixth level, was also approved with a condition that the conditional rezoning be amended. So with that, so the original conditional rezoning was specific to a or the site plan approved by council, and it allowed a little, apparently not enough wiggle room for the site plan and special use permit to be amended in the future. So what this does is it goes back and fixes that so that modifications can be made to the site plan without having to affect an amendment to the conditional rezoning agreement. And with that, I would take any. Yeah, it should. Well, you never know. I mean, the point of trying to get the wording correct is so that we aren't in that position again, if it were to happen. So, with that, I would take any questions.
Some questions for Mr. Haywood. Commissioner Wolf.
So the one that we are considering now is the one that's described as the substitute.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
14?
Yes. Since the ordinance was introduced, yeah, I guess it was kind of rethunk, and apparently it's more appropriate to amend the agreement than necessarily do the full-on replacement or rezoning.
Right, we
So
talked
that's-
about some of the things that were a little confusing about the way it was
Yeah.
written initially.
Yeah, so that's what the substitute does.
Thanks. Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Haywood? Commissioner Wolf?
I will move that we recommend approval of ordinance 1479, the one that is labeled as substitute ordinance 1479 in our agenda. A request from 341 Evergreen LLC to amend the conditional rezoning originally adopted under ordinance 1435 for the property at 341 through 345 Evergreen Avenue to allow for revisions to the associated site plan and special use permit now and in the future.
I guess a procedural question, we have to hold a public hearing too before we.
Oh, is that correct?
Oh, no, we've already done that. This is the action item.
That's
I'm sorry.
right.
Never mind.
Thank you. Thanks. Keep me on my
Second.
toes. Thank you. Thank you. So there's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Is there discussion on this motion? Talk about it anymore? All right, then, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries. It'll move us on to new business. There's nothing on our agenda. Are there any commissioner concerns? Item 9. Vice Chair Boyle.
Yes, I understand that, I realize that the proposals for the new hub buildings have moved on to council, but I became aware over the holidays that there had been a vapor intrusion in the existing hub building on the corner. I wonder if planning staff was aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. My understanding is there'd been a vapor intrusion, that the state was overseeing that. And it was, I think, as we probably most of us know, there was formerly a gas station on that property on the corner. And if there was a vapor intrusion, it probably was from some historic leakage at one of the tanks at the gas station. But one of the reasons I just raised the issue is my understanding is if you have a plume because of a leak from a fuel storage tank, it tends to move towards the river. Mm-hmm. And if in fact that is what is happening here, I'm wondering if that's being considered as far as the plans for the new hub building. So I just bring that to your attention.
As it turns out, the spokesperson for the applicant is here and is standing, and I don't know that it would be inappropriate to, if you wanted to say something, yeah.
If
Please.
I could, I would really like the opportunity to clear that up.
Yes, please.
David Pearson on behalf of Core Campus. The contamination from the old gas station was fully identified and defined both in terms of the area that it covered and where it was going many years ago. In fact, the DEQ, now Eagle, had money set aside specifically for cleanup. As it happened, because of the construction schedule, the work was done by Core instead of the DEQ, but it included the excavation and removal safely of 30,000 cubic feet of soils underneath, the testing to check the levels of what was left below that level, and then before the building and during the construction and the excavation, there is a vapor barrier that was installed, and then there is, in addition, essentially, to make sure there is a vapor mitigation system which moves any vapor out and vents it. There's a fairly complicated system for that, but I can tell you that as it was going in, Triterra, Core's environmental consultant, was on site overseeing the excavation, the installation of the vapor barrier. They actually test and take samples of the vapor barrier to make sure that it's the correct thickness, to make sure that there are not weak spots or breaks, and if there were any, that they're properly sealed, and then make sure that the foundation goes in a place that doesn't disturb the vapor barrier, then the installation of the vapor mitigation system. What came up in a communication from Eagle to the city was a request for additional documentation from Triterra of what had been done. So although Triterra has and keeps in its own files logs of all of the inspections and all of the testing that was done along the way that Eagle works today with many environmental things is you simply tell them they're done, and then if they want to check, they request documentation. There was a request for documentation in September. Triterra responded and provided what they thought was responsive based on the other projects that they've worked on around the state. Then the DEQ said, we want additional documentation. And that's the request that came to the attention of the city. What was surprising and what raised a concern was the way the DEQ termed it in their letter was that it was a violation notice, saying that unless you provide us with the adequate documentation, then you would be in violation of your due care duty to make sure that there is no release of the vapors. There has been further testing. There has been a series of meetings with the DEQ, also with the Department of Health and Human Services, to make sure that all of that documentation is adequate. Those discussions are ongoing, but the one thing that has occurred is that in all of the additional testing, it's clear from Triterra's tests that the vapor mitigation system and the vapor barrier are working. There is no vapor intrusion into the space above. The particular concern with the testing was actually the commercial spaces, the retail spaces, which were under construction, because they're in the area where the vapor mitigation movement system is set up, and they wanted further testing there. So that has been ongoing in terms of the discussion, but to date there's been nothing that indicates that any of those measures are not effective, or that there's any health concerns at all. So, as I say, we've been providing follow-up information to the city as those discussions continue. Certainly hope to do so, and if anyone has any questions, we're happy to address those.
Well, do you have any information as to whether the plume has extended beyond the property that's occupied by the present hub?
I believe the work that had to be done with the excavation was to ensure that it doesn't go off-site. But let me follow up on that question, because my understanding had been that it does not affect any of the other adjacent sites. And in fact, it only affects, as I understand it, a portion of the site that Hub 1 is built on. But I'd be happy to follow up with that, because everybody's been looking up instead of looking down, and you're the first one to ask, so what's happening down below? I guess the one thing I would tell you is that the DEQ, before it became Eagle, was always concerned with the stuff down there. It's only in the last 3 or 4 years that vapor has been a real focus of theirs. So I'll follow up, but my suspicion is that that's what was more completely addressed earlier, and it's the vapor that became an issue later in the due diligence. So, thanks. Glad to do that. Appreciate the opportunity to
thanks
address
for
that.
coming forward. Any questions for Mr. Pearson? All right,
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Other commissioner concerns? All right, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved by Vice Chair Boyle and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed. We are adjourned at 8:09.
Considering the length of the agenda.